What if I told you that right now, sitting in a classified filing room inside a federal building in Washington, D.C.? See, there are documents, actual government documents, that describe contact with beings that were not from this planet. Not theory, not rumor documents. Signed, stamped, buried, and the people who tried to bring those documents to light, some of them lost their careers, some lost their minds, and a few of them, well, they disappeared in ways that nobody can fully explain. Welcome to Historyville. And tonight, we are pulling back the curtain on something the most powerful government on Earth has spent decades trying to make you forget. Let me start with something that happened on the night of July 8th, 1947, in the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. Now, you've heard the name Roswell before. Most people have. But I want you to forget whatever version of this story you think you know, because what actually happened that night goes so much deeper than a weather balloon and so much darker than anything the Air Force ever admitted to the public. A rancher named Mac Brazel rode out across his property in the early morning hours and found something that made him stop his horse completely. Across a stretch of land about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide, there was wreckage. Not the wreckage of any aircraft he had ever seen. He picked up pieces of it and later described the material as nothing like metal he had ever touched. It was thin, almost like foil, but when you crumpled it up and let go, it returned to its original shape without a single crease. He described symbols pressed into some of the pieces, not letters, not numbers, but something geometric, almost like hieroglyphics, but more angular, more deliberate. He loaded what he could into his truck and drove it to the local sheriff. By the next morning, the United States Army Air Force had descended on that ranch like nothing Brazel had ever seen. Not a few officers, not a small investigation team, dozens of personnel, military vehicles lining the dirt road. And they collected everything, every single fragment. They even came back and plowed the soil in certain sections of the field. Brazel himself was taken in for questioning and held for several days. When he came out, he told people the story had changed. He said it was a weather balloon. He never publicly contradicted that story again. But people who knew him said he was never the same man after those few days in military custody. Here is what most people don't know. The very first press release issued by the Roswell Army Airfield on July 8th, 1947, written by a public information officer named Walter Haut and authorized by Base Commander Colonel William Blanchard, explicitly stated that the Army had recovered a flying disc, not a weather balloon, not a research device, a flying disc. That press release went out on the wire. Newspapers across the country ran it. And then, within hours, it was retracted. A second story replaced it. The weather balloon story appeared. And an entire chain of command, from Colonel Blanchard all the way up to General Roger Ramey, got on board with the new narrative so fast that it made veteran journalists of the era deeply suspicious. Now fast forward to 1978. A nuclear physicist and UFO researcher named Stanton Friedman tracked down Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who had actually been sent out to the Brazel Ranch to collect the original debris. Marcel had been silent for over 30 years. But when Friedman sat across from him and asked him what he had seen, Marcel said something that shook the research community. He said the material he recovered was not made on this earth. He said he had handled every kind of aircraft wreckage in his career, and nothing he had ever seen before or since matched what came off that field. He said he was ordered to pose for photographs with weather balloon materials he had nothing to do with collecting, so the press could photograph a plausible explanation. Marcel was a decorated military officer, a man who had participated in the documentation of the atomic bomb tests. He had no motive to fabricate any of this. He just finally, in his 60s, wanted someone to know the truth. But here is where this story takes a turn that most YouTube channels won't touch, because the debris field was only part of what was recovered at Roswell. Multiple witnesses, interviewed separately over decades, described a second sight, a crash site, not just wreckage, a craft, partially intact. And inside that craft, according to accounts from mortician Glenn Dennis, who received calls from the Roswell base asking about child-sized hermetically sealed caskets and the preservation of bodies exposed to desert heat, there were occupants. Dennis was told, in no uncertain terms, by a nurse he knew at the base who had been present at some kind of examination, that what they were dealing with was not human. The nurse, known in the record only as Naomi, was transferred out of Roswell within days. Dennis never heard from her again. He spent the rest of his life trying to find out what happened to her. I want you to sit with that for a second. A nurse who witnessed something inside a military installation, transferred immediately, vanished from the record. In a democratic country with a free press and constitutional protections, gone. Now, I want to take you somewhere else entirely. Because Roswell, as earth-shattering as it is just the opening chapter of a much longer and much more disturbing story. Let's go to Lonnie Zamora, a police officer in Socorro, New Mexico, on April 24, 1964. Zamora was chasing a speeding car when he heard a loud roar and saw a flame dropping in the sky about a half-mile away. He thought a dynamite shack nearby had exploded. He broke off his pursuit and drove toward the flame. What he found when he crested a hill made him slam his brakes. In a gully below him was an egg-shaped craft, white, smooth, about the size of a car, sitting on legs. And next to it, two figures, small, in white coveralls. They looked at him. He looked at them. And then one of them made a noise. He described it as a sharp sound, not a voice, not mechanical, something in between, and within seconds, the craft's flame returned. The legs retracted, and it rose directly into the air without tilting, without rotating, without any of the mechanical drama that any known aircraft would produce. It simply lifted, flew away at low altitude, and left 4 burn marks and indentations in the soil exactly where the landing legs had been. Zamora was interviewed by the FBI, the Air Force, and Project Blue Book, the official government UFO investigation program. His account never wavered. Not once. The physical evidence at the site, the burns, the indentations, the disturbed soil, and broken brush was documented. Project Blue Book's own scientific advisor, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who started his career as a committed skeptic hired specifically to debunk UFO reports, called the Socorro case one of the most credible and physically substantiated encounters he had ever investigated. He said he could find no explanation. He put it in the unsolved category, which, for a program whose entire mandate was to close cases and explain them away, meant something significant. And here's the detail that keeps me up at night when I think about the Socorro case. After the encounter, Zamora was walking back toward the gully to examine the burn marks more closely when a tourist named Opal Grinder, who ran a gas station nearby, spoke to him. Grinder said a car had pulled into his station shortly before Zamora's encounter, and the driver, a stranger, not a local, had pointed toward the area where the object was later seen and asked what all the commotion was about. The driver had apparently already seen something in that gully, and then he drove away and was never identified. Somebody else was watching. Somebody who didn't go to the police. Somebody who left before the military arrived. This is the part of history that gets buried not with a shovel, but with paperwork, with reclassifications, with reassignments, with the quiet understanding inside the institutions that hold these secrets that some things are simply not for the public to know. And the question that History Veil has been built to ask, the question I need you to sit with as we close out this first part, is not whether extraterrestrial intelligence exists. The evidence for that is already overwhelming when you look at it honestly and completely. The real question is this: how long have they known? And what made them decide that we couldn't handle the truth? Because the answer to that question changes everything. Stay with us, because in part 2, we go somewhere most people are afraid to look. We go inside the programs, the black budget projects, the whistleblowers who gave up everything, and the ancient evidence that suggests this isn't a modern story at all.